You might not realize it, but mathematics can unlock incredible power. You can use it to make your dreams become reality. Mathematics is a powerful tool for exploring life on Earth and for discovering our place in the universe. Mathematics is changing the way we play our games, the way we think about ourselves. It's the fuel that's driving the information age. This is mathematics like you've never seen it before.
Major funding for this program comes from the National Science Foundation. America's investment in the future. And the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to increase understanding of the application of mathematics in everyday life. Additional funding provided by the McDonnell Douglas Foundation and the Alcoa Foundation, with exclusive corporate support from Texas Instruments.
Texas Instruments is proud to partner with the education community to create the calculators that help children do extraordinary things. Because the more our children can get out of math and science, the more they'll get out of life.
Call it in the air, heads or tails. Sometimes it'll be heads, sometimes tails. I don't know what any particular flip will be, but I do know that if I flip a coin many times, it will be heads about half the time and the other half tails. That's a pattern. In the long run, all random events have a pattern. If I know the pattern, I can predict how likely something is to happen. To look for patterns, we rely on the mathematics of statistics. Statistics is the science of collecting and analyzing data, and it touches all of our lives. Statistics is a part of our games. It helps in the search for new life-saving drugs. And it enables us to gauge people's opinions, what we think and feel about certain issues. Every day we flip a coin and try to learn from the patterns we find. We're living our chances of a lifetime.
Our high today, 61 degrees, the low 37, just 2 degrees shy of a record for the day.
Many of us get a daily dose of statistics through the media.
61 degrees, relative humidity at 36%.
We use this information to make sense of the world. For statistician Hal Stern, statistics helps him to track his favorite baseball teams, to see the game behind the numbers.
I always liked numbers. I was the kid who played with his calculator more than was probably good, and always interested in sports. And thinking back now, I realize it's probably for the numbers. I was the guy on the Little League team who computed people's batting averages and the like. One of the things I like about all sports is that seems to me anyway, to be uncertainty kind of at its finest. Baseball is a fine example. The uncertainty is there, and there's also a long history of keeping track of records and numbers and averages. And it's a wonderful place to play.
Numbers and averages are important to statisticians, and baseball is filled with revealing data.
When I think of baseball statistics, I think of batting averages and won-loss records and pitchers' earned run averages, and those are what I like to think of as small s statistics.
In baseball, small s statistics are used to track players' performances. And some small s statistics are legendary. Hank Aaron's record of 755 home runs is a small s statistic that has stood for more than 2 decades.
Out of here! It's gone! It's 7-15! The home run champion of all time!
Cal Ripken entered the record books by playing in 2,131 consecutive games. That's a streak of 13 straight years. Nolan Ryan has amazed baseball fans with an incredible small s statistic. He has pitched 7 games in which no player has gotten a hit.
Small s statistics, they're numbers, and they're interesting. But the field of statistics, or capital S statistics, is more about drawing conclusions from those numbers.
In baseball parks across the country, the person responsible for making decisions based on statistics is the manager.
The manager in baseball has the role, in some ways, that the statistician would want. He knows his players and their abilities, and is faced with situations every inning about where decisions have to be made.
Hal Stern is a fan of the Iowa Cubs, a Triple-A team for the Chicago Cubs, one step away from the majors. The Cubs manager is Ron Clark. For 9 innings, Clark will rely on statistics to evaluate and make decisions about his team and the game.
Hey, let's bring them on. Your 1995 Iowa Cubs.
This process of analyzing data to draw conclusions began more than 1,000 years ago, half a world away. England, the Middle Ages. William the Conqueror is presiding over a vast kingdom, a collection of wealth he actually knows very little about. To assess his kingdom, he assembles an army to gather data.
William the Conqueror wanted data on all of England, and he sent around his data gatherers. They divided up the country into small areas and asked of each area how many people were living there and what sort of agricultural products were coming from there. This, in a sense, was a beginning of statistics, but there was no real statistical analysis at that time. It was simply a tremendously ambitious data gathering operation.
This collection of statistics provided William the Conqueror with an assessment of his kingdom and wealth. The text was named the Domesday Book, but the real power of the book would not be recognized for another 500 years. By the middle of the 17th century, England had grown, but nobody really knew the size of the population. According to popular belief, England's largest city, London, was home to more than 2 million people. To one London resident, this was idle speculation. John Grant believed that he could deduce London's true population by using data from the Doomsday Book.
Many statisticians and historians of statistics date the origin of statistical thinking to John Grant. John Grant was not an academic. He ran a store. He was a haberdasher. But he got hold of these records and began looking at them and was able to do some rather remarkable analysis.
By studying the stats in the Doomsday Book, one piece of information got Grant's attention. On average, it appeared as if there were 10,000 christenings every year. Using this small statistic, Grant began to make some inferences. Grant reasoned that if there were 10,000 christenings, this would be closely related to the number of births. The number of births relates to the number of women of childbearing age. The number of women relates to the number of families and their size. Through his calculation, Grant determined that England's population wasn't 2 million, but rather 1/5 that size, or 384,000. Most experts today believe Grant's estimate was very close to the true numbers. By drawing conclusions from data, Grant began modern statistical analysis. Back at Sec Taylor Stadium, manager Ron Clark is faced with his own set of numbers to consider. It's late in the game, the bottom of the 6th inning, and Clark's team is behind 2-1. Clark's first batter gets on base. With no outs and the tying run on first base, Clark needs to develop a strategy to advance the runner. He considers a sacrifice bunt. In a sacrifice bunt, the batter bunts the ball in front of the plate. The batter will probably be thrown out as the sacrifice. The bunt, however, enables a runner to advance. On the surface, this looks like a good choice. However, Clark considers several other statistics. On the mound is pitcher Steve Olson. One of Olson's small s statistics is very telling. He has a high earned run average of 4.57, which means he gives away an average of more than 4 runs per game. Batting next against Olson is outfielder Brooks Kiesnick, who has a good batting average. As does third baseman Matt Franco, who is on deck. With 2 batters coming up with good batting averages against a pitcher who gives away a lot of runs, Clark makes a decision and signals his batter. In this case, Clark's decision pays off. The tying run has advanced without sacrificing an out.
Baseball managers, I think, have a very difficult job. Deciding whether to bunt or who to play on a particular day depends on the manager's decision. The decision making is hard because you don't know what's going to happen, and you're making decisions based on what are going to give you the best chance of success.
On this day, Clark's strategy for the Iowa Cubs works, and they win 6-5. A victory built on athletics and statistics. One of probability theory's greatest powers is that it can help us to gauge public opinion. And this touches all of our lives.
The stakes are very high for this institution because once again the American people will be asking if we can govern.
Politicians rely on
Democrats
public
stay
opinion
united
to
and
keep
lead
track of their
instead of dividing
constituents' values.
Our major economic asset is our people. All of our policies, therefore, must be people-focused.
Public opinion influences what we see on television. And what we find in the supermarket.
Virtually every facet of our everyday lives, to some extent, is influenced through public opinion.
What is it they make Dodger dogs out of?
New products are tested, typically through surveying techniques. Also, public opinion polling, to a large extent, determines what it is that we see on TV.
Do you want milk or yogurt?
Okay, what'd you get?
Cherry vanilla.
Cherry vanilla? I gotta have peach.
We're interested, typically in this country, in knowing what a majority of the people feel. That's behind our basic political structure. That's how it is. You'd go about calculating it, and then the way I interpret this information statistically is I tack
In the
on
classroom,
a margin of
Kay
error to the
teaches
point
opinion
estimate.
polling.
If I subtract 6% from this, I get 69%.
But in the
That's
classroom,
lower
the
limit
true
by
power of
subtracting
probability
6 and
isn't
75.
always obvious.
What amounts to is the amount of information you obtain. I went through a number of theoretical techniques, derived a lot of formulas and this and that, but I always wondered, does this stuff really work in practice? Now, what's the next one of these things I can do in my head?
To test theories of probability, Kay established his own public opinion polling business, which he runs from his home. His wife, Gary, is the other half of Kay Associates.
No, this is my stuff.
We have been in the public opinion polling business for about 10 years here in El Paso. We kind of work as a team together. What a public opinion poll will do is actually quantify how it is that a particular body of people feel about a particular issue at a particular time.
A public opinion poll can enable Kay to understand what the more than 500,000 residents of El Paso are thinking. Amazingly, he can gain this insight by just gathering the opinions of a small group. According to the laws of probability, a small representative group will accurately reflect the opinions of a larger society if the participants are chosen at random.
How many of these do I have to do?
Selecting the respondents or potential respondents in a scientific survey is very much like trying to get a representative sample from a large container of minestrone soup. First thing I want to do, and this is where the randomization comes in, just as it does in a scientific public opinion poll, you want to make sure that the pot is thoroughly stirred. Okay, we stir it, reach in and pull it out. This gives me a pretty good indication of what the ingredients are in the minestrone. I look at it, I see I've got sausage, I've got carrots in here, I've got green beans, I've got kidney beans, and I've got some onions in here and also some celery. So by thoroughly stirring the pot, I was able to get a representative sample of what the soup ingredients are. Just to illustrate the importance of the mixing, what I'm going to do is now reach in and just pull out a sample from the top, and I'll see how representative that is of the soup ingredients. Well, the scoop size is still the same. I've got the same size sample, but I don't have a thorough mix, so I don't end up with a representative sample.
When pollsters scoop out participants, it is essential that they start with sample groups that are truly representative. If the group is not representative, no amount of mixing and scooping will help. The poll will be misleading. For example, one of the biggest blunders in polling involved one of the largest polls in history. In 1936, the Literary Digest magazine polled 10 million people and predicted that Republican Alf Landon was going to be the next president of the United States. The fact that you might not recognize Alf Landon's name is a good indicator that the poll was dead wrong. The problem with the Digest poll was to create their sample group. For starters, the Digest relied on various lists, and the lists were not representative of the population. For example, lists derived from the phone book left out people who didn't have phones. This was a large part of the population in 1936. Membership lists from country clubs excluded poorer participants. That same year, another pollster, George Gallup, was getting his start. Gallup chose lists that truly represented the population. To ensure an accurate mix, he then chose 50,000 people at random, which is less than 1% of the size of the Literary Digest sample. Because Gallup relied on sound sampling techniques, his results were more accurate. Gallup predicted that Roosevelt would be victorious by a landslide. And the rest is history. For both men. Polling is a critical element these days for every election. And before the mayoral election in El Paso, Bill Kay performs a series of public opinion polls. To establish the sample for his poll, Kay begins with the list that reflects El Paso's diverse population. This is like his large pot of minestrone soup. Next, he uses his computer to randomly scoop a group from the list.
A lot of people have a difficult time in conceiving that it's possible by taking a relatively small sample on the order of hundreds, you can actually make a generalization about a population, say, of perhaps even millions. It's always very interesting to me. I really get a kick out of finally when this is all the effort's been done, I can actually tabulate the numbers and see what the poll shows.
By relying on good polling techniques, Kay is able to predict the outcome of the El Paso mayoral election. And to the surprise of some, what was perceived as a horse race turns out to be a landslide.
Okay, this is hot off the computer, all 309 respondents.
Live from the news station. This is News 7 at 6.
Now here's a look at the actual numbers from the El Paso Times News 7 poll that led Carlos Ramirez to his decision
Dr.
today.
Fink at 7%. Carlos Ramirez, 14%. Mayor Francis, 71% of the people are going to vote for him.
Larry Francis is their choice for mayor.
So call up his honor very quickly and be nice to him.
While probability is critical for creating an accurate random sample, one of its greatest powers is that it helps us to assess the value of results. And this power, as you'll see, is helping in the battle against disease. Over $14 billion is spent yearly in the United States on medical research, and often the results are dramatic.
For the first time, researchers are saying they have evidence that AZT can actually prevent the spread of AIDS.
In the search for new drugs, we turn to probability. Probability helps us to determine the safety and effectiveness of new medicines.
Scientists say the new test should be a great help in finding better treatments or a cure.
Susan Ellenberg is a division director at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Her department designs and evaluates studies of new vaccines. She remembers what was possibly the most famous application of statistics to fight disease: the polio vaccine trials of the 1950s.
Not sure that I did it right. Anybody who was around back then will remember there was enormous concern. Everyone was very fearful about polio. People wouldn't let their kids go swimming. It was one of the most fearful diseases.
Between 1916 and the 1950s, something mysterious and terrible was happening to America's children. Without warning, infants and young people would begin to experience excruciating muscle pain and stiffness in the neck. Those afflicted by the symptoms might lose the use of their limbs or become paralyzed. In some cases, they might even die. Polio, as the disease was called, claimed many hundreds of thousands of young victims in the United States. And with the baby boom, the epidemic threatened even more harm.
In a way, this was a time period when American society was very closely attuned to polio as a problem. After all, it was the post-World War II era. There were a massive growth in the number of children being born in America and a concern about their health and safety.
In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a city of smoke and steel, there came a glimmer of hope. Dr. Jonas Salk believed he'd found a vaccine, and he set out to test his medicine. To ensure that his tests were accurate, Salk relied on careful statistical methodology. In 1954, 1.8 million school children would partake in the trial, the largest of its kind in history. The children were separated into two groups at random. Because of the random assignments, the laws of probability practically guaranteed that the two groups would be nearly identical. And that sameness would help Salk track the effects of his new drug. For example, if Salk did nothing and just watched the groups, according to the laws of probability, both groups would come down with roughly the same number of polio cases. If, on the other hand, Salk gave one group his vaccine and they had fewer cases of polio, this might mean that his drug worked, and probability would help him to gauge its effectiveness.
You needed to have children treated at the same point in time and be able to say, did the group that got the vaccine have fewer cases of polio than the group that didn't get the vaccine?
As the Salk trial progressed, it did appear as if the group that got the vaccine had fewer instances of polio. To be certain the success rate was due to the drug and not just chance, Salk's data was subjected to statistical analysis. To assess the data, the researchers focused their attention on the total number of polio cases reported in both groups. If the difference between groups was small, so small that it could be mere chance, the vaccine would be found not to be effective. As the researchers tabulated the data, they found that the differences were so great that they could not be attributed to chance. The vaccine had proven an overwhelming success.
In many ways, I think the Salk development of the vaccine represents an ideal, a high point of both the faith in medical science and the ability of medical science to produce. And in a way, I think ever since the 1950s, medical science has aspired to that ideal of the Salk vaccine trials.
Today, clinical trials are conducted at the National Institutes of Health Clinical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. Over 900 trials are conducted here each year. Just like the Salk trial, participants are assembled into groups. Today, random numbers are used to decide who gets a drug and who gets a neutral substance, called a placebo. Doctors are still responsible for monitoring and recording the well-being of their patients.
That's right, it doesn't turn around all the way.
But the true key of a drug's success will be derived from the numbers.
The FDA, in deciding whether a new drug or new product can be approved, needs to see the data. We have to say, show me your results, show me that you did a valid study, and show me that the results really show, one, that this product is safe, and two, that it works.
Under the power of statistical analysis, we can develop new drugs to help battle disease. Statistics can also be used to protect us in the face of uncertainty. No one knows what the future holds. But by using statistics and probability, we can begin to discover useful patterns.
In a way, probability helps you to put some kind of a pattern on randomness. You can't tell what's going to happen from step to step, but you can predict what's going to happen over the long haul.
By uncovering patterns, we can better evaluate new life-saving drugs.
Small number has a pretty big difference.
We can gauge the opinions of the masses and get a handle on the uncertainty that touches all of our lives.
Being able to handle uncertainty, which basically is what probability is, or what statistics is about. That's always been just very fascinating to me, to be able to foretell the future.
Predicting the future helps us to make decisions about the present. And making decisions, evaluating information, is at the heart of statistics.
Information and decisions gets at what we try to do. People think naturally of the numbers, and less of what I think the interesting part is, using the numbers to make decisions about everything under the sun.
Exclusive corporate support for this program comes from Texas Instruments.
Texas Instruments is proud to partner with the education community to create the calculators that help children do extraordinary things. Because the more our children can get out of math and science, the more they'll get out of life.
With major funding from the National Science Foundation. America's investment in the future. And the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to increase understanding of the application of mathematics in everyday life. Additional funding provided by the McDonnell Douglas Foundation and the Alcoa Foundation.
This is PBS.